Let's take a walk into the future. A year from now, Rob Manfred and Major League Baseball will be at a standstill with Tony Clark and the Players Association on the league's collective bargaining agreement, the document that governs baseball. There are a bunch of topics that will dominate that discussion, most notably whether the two sides agree on a salary cap. But there's a particular element of those negotiations which I think is inevitable, and it will dramatically impact Major League Baseball, minor league baseball, and even college baseball. Let's call it development offloading. Now, why this would happen is pretty simple. MiLB, which represents the owners of the 30 Major League Baseball teams, wants to save money. To save as a business operator, look at something that is less profitable and cut it. This is how Major League Baseball may look at the minor leagues presently. Attendance was down about 3% year over year compared to 2024, and it's on a 3-year downtrend. The minor leagues attract over 30 million fans a season, which is definitely a substantial number, but the Class A level makes up roughly 13% of that number, while every other level is at about 20% or more. Eno Saris of The Athletic also reported that MLB is seeking to centralize tech and data that minor league teams can use as early as next season. Put another way, they don't want one team spending egregiously more than another team to gain an edge. So if MLB wants to take this whole operation in-house, they will approve specific vendors and pay themselves to outfit the minors with this new technology. This means more costs. And slashing a minor league level does nothing but lower those expenses. Listen, I think it makes sense from like a shrewd business standpoint to cut this lower level of the minors, but it flat out sucks. I grew up on the minor leagues, going to New Britain Rockcats and New Haven Ravens games. Neither of these teams even exist anymore. I still have this amazing bobblehead on my desk, but they were affordable, really close to my house. I was motivated by seeing low-level players that eventually would be on my TV in a year or two's time. Is MLB considering that 12-year-old version of myself when cutting this level of the low minors? I think they might be, contrary to popular belief, but the problem is it's hard to understand how consumption habits of a 12-year-old boy have changed overall with the advent of social media. I just don't think it's as convincing for the league to go, we need to maintain these 30 teams in order to grow the sport. So we have to accept that the present state right now in this very moment of baseball is going to be really hard to maintain going forward. At the same time, it's tough to just stare fans in the face and go, we need to save money, when the value of franchises have appreciated probably about 100% on average since 2015. So you kind of have to Trojan horse the cost savings here. And the way to do that is through the first-year player draft. The draft went from 40 rounds before 2020 to 20 after the pandemic, and at this point in time, it feels likely that it's going to fall to 10 in order to catalyze this cost savings we're talking about. Jacob Rudner had this as a possibility in a piece for Baseball America, and I've heard it from others as well. And this is exactly where our concept of development offloading starts. If you slash a minor league level, forcing players back to the complexes in Arizona and Florida, and then don't immediately inject another 300 names into organizations by cutting the draft, you're basically saying, hey, we want to have less of a direct impact on the development of these players who eventually will be MLB talent. So where's this development being offloaded to? Well, college baseball, obviously. The problem is just college baseball is going through something spectacularly complex and chaotic.
Yeah, it's a disaster.
No one better to hear it from than one of the best coaches in college baseball, Tony Vitello, who Buster Posey and the Giants named their new manager this offseason. He was the headliner to transition from college to pro ball this year, but he foreshadowed a number of other coaches migrating from the collegiate to pro circuit in various roles. The reason, in a lot of cases, may have simply been better opportunities or better pay, but in talking to a few present collegiate coaches and one who is actually in the process of making that transition, the other thing everybody wants to get away from is NIL, or name, image, likeness, college athletes being paid. So here goes an attempt by me to try to explain these really confusing rules. I talked to a couple people for this video. They all were fantastic in helping me out, but they admitted the blind spots that pretty much everybody has in this situation to various elements of things, especially outside of the individual colleges that, say, an individual might work at. So I'm attempting to explain these things. I caution that I'm not entirely sure I'm 100% right. But if you know more than I do watching this video, my DMs are open. So let me know perhaps where I got things wrong, or do it in the comments. For the 2025-2026 academic year, individual colleges, think about all sports here, not just baseball, were capped at $20.5 million in revenue sharing that they were allowed to pay their players for their name, image, and likeness, aka NIL. This money is coming directly from the school's wallet. The actual amount any one school has can change. For big ACC and SEC baseball schools, we can assume the number is close to that $20.5 million. On average in the Big 12, for example, it's maybe more half that number or perhaps 3/4. Once the school has that revenue share amount determined, they choose which sports at that school get what percent of the total pool. It's no surprise that football and basketball often dominate this allocation in a lot of cases. Baseball is often a distant third, or in many cases, well lower than third. So if the University of Georgia has $20 million as a school to spend, maybe the baseball team gets 5% of that, which would be $1 million. That seems pretty simple until you realize that there's not just one stream through which teams can pay players. They also have scholarship allocations. The NCAA approved a max of 34 scholarships for baseball for the 25-26 academic year, which would cover an entire roster of baseball players. But how many scholarships each school has is at the discretion of the school. And in some cases, it seems influenced perhaps by the conference. The SEC, for example, might choose 20 full scholarships as their number for baseball. But you also have to consider the in and out of state implications for an individual player based on their state of residence. Okay, we're starting to get a little more complex here. You can see with the scholarship angle, but now is where things start to really fog up, to extend Vitella's metaphor. Teams could also raise money through fundraising. Think of this outside of the revenue share pool and outside of the scholarship pool, not directly coming from the school, but rather from, say, boosters, for example, or alumni networks that want to give back to the program. The NCAA tried to set up a clearinghouse for this money when it exceeded a certain total. Now, whether that exists or it's enforced at the $600 threshold, which has been floated, or they have any authority, I literally have no idea. And it doesn't seem like anybody else does either. This added pool of money is really where the ambiguity comes from. For big SEC schools in baseball, this number can literally exceed or match the revenue share number in a lot of cases. So if you have a big, wealthy alumni network, you could double the money you have to recruit players. Georgia, for example, might have that $1 million in revenue share, let's say 20 full scholarships, and then this pool of money, which gets them another $1 million. Compare that to Oregon State in the Big 12. Maybe they have like $10 million, $15 million in that area as an entire school for all of their sports in that revenue share pool, not $20 million like these other SEC and ACC teams. And let's say baseball gets like 3% of that, so $300,000. And then they raise another $250,000 and have maybe slightly more on the scholarship side. You can quickly see how Georgia has maybe 3 to 4 times the resources compared to one of these West Coast baseball teams like Oregon State. The issue that many seem to have with this structure is that by injecting so much money into college sports going directly to the players, it's good they're benefiting, but you're starting to see decisions get made without the best interest of the player in mind, specifically from a development standpoint. And now you could start to see the connection back to what we're talking about in terms of development offloading. MiLB, perhaps in the next calendar year, will offload some of this development to a structure that people are presently complaining is not prioritizing development. Let's say there's a high school lefty from California, middle-class family. He gets offered a full ride to Georgia with $150,000 in NIL to be the team's 10th or 15th best pitcher. Oregon State offers the same full scholarship and $50,000 in NIL, which is a hefty 10% of their total pool. And he'd be their 3rd or 4th best pitcher. That's already a tough decision. And then let's say he goes to Oregon State and he's really good. A year later, Arkansas steps in and goes, we'll pay you $200K in NIL, whereas Oregon State can't go higher than $80K in that subsequent season. Oregon State maybe knew this was a possibility the whole season while they were coaching him as well, and perhaps they made calculated decisions about how aggressive to be with his development points along the way for fear of losing him.
A word that I kept coming up with is sequence. I think there's a sequence that takes place in the development of an athlete. All of us at some point have tiptoed around something because of the threat of the transfer portal or a guy being disgruntled.
This sequence of development gets at a larger theme of whether college teams holding a larger share of a player's development timeline before being a pro is good or bad for the sport of baseball. Now, there's obviously going to be winners and losers. It'll be good for some kids and kinds of players from specific areas and perhaps not from others. But what is the net effect? Is that good or bad? And by how much? I know people love very definitive answers in this day and age, but you're not going to get that in this video. This topic in particular to me is so complex, so layered, and so forward-looking that it's almost impossible to put a confidence interval above, say, like 60 to 70% on. So I'm hanging around the 55% area, slightly over a coin flip as to whether I'm incorrect or correct. And I'm going to say it's a net negative, ever so slightly. And I think that's mainly from a pure development standpoint. I acknowledge a lot of the positives here of players getting paid at the collegiate level and compensated for their name, image, likeness, all these other elements. I do think a lot of college teams have players' best interests in mind from a development standpoint, but I fear that the rich are going to get a bit richer and be able to sway players off paths that other teams just can't really compete with. The Oregon States, the West Coast baseball teams, maybe good development hubs. You know, UCSB is going to have 2 top 10 pitchers in the most recent draft in this upcoming one, most likely. That's kind of insane, but they're likely to never probably compete in Omaha. So it creates some weird value discrepancies here where maybe it's actually better to be one of these small schools without football such that you can have larger revenue share, or just be a huge SEC school, almost like an inverted bell curve in terms of the overall benefit and advantage you have as a college. Tons of layers here. My gut tells me this would be a net negative to offload this much development to the collegiate side. And looking even further into the future, what if the long-term goal is to cut even more minor league baseball? You just took out Class A, now High A looks like the least relevant overall, only 2 million more people attracted in a given year. At some point, the minor leagues in baseball may just be a slightly more expanded version of the G League in the NBA, which again means more and more talent to college baseball, more and more development offloading. This leads to one of the ultimate points I wanted to make in this video. We're going back to probabilistic thinking here, but I'm going to say there's about a 10% chance that as we fast forward through this next CBA, so let's say this CBA is like a 5 to 6 year one, we go to 2032, in that year, that CBA then allows for teams to draft the rights of players in college and have say over their development. This is truly like the final form, in my opinion, of development offloading. It'd be very similar to what the NHL does with their athletes, where a team can draft a player's rights and then they have say over their development path and where they play. In this scenario, I think all college players would be eligible after one season of play. So teams can draft a player that just completed his freshman season. The Nationals, for example, could draft a freshman pitcher from LSU at 5th overall in the year 2035. And then they have the option over the next 3 summers to exercise the right to pull that player into their organization or let him develop for another season at LSU and make that decision after the next collegiate year. The residual effects of what I'm talking about right here are massive. I'm not going to dig into all of the peripheral things in this video. It'd just be a ton of speculation. That's why I threw like the 10% probability on it. That connects back to the fact that after this new CBA is renegotiated, after the 2026 season we have coming up here, I think we have to like read and react. There's going to be a lot of reading and reacting going on. If you talk to people in baseball right now, I think they would all say it's maybe just around a 50% chance or slightly lower than a 50% chance that what I talked about earlier in this video of slashing A ball, cutting the draft is likely. And I think what MLB wants at that point is to understand what exactly happens afterwards. What does the ecosystem look like? How is this affecting things? Is it too much of a negative or a strain on player development? You know, should these players have more time in major league organizations to develop as opposed to being offloaded? And is the draft too short? There's so many implications that we're not going to know about until we actually see this in practice. The first step of it is, again, what I think is perhaps most probable: no more Class A, the draft is cut, and then we see how things roll. And in that, say, 5 to 6 year window, the length of this subsequent CBA coming up after 2026, we start to unpack a variety of other things that I imagine, or hopefully I'll be talking about on this channel as to how it's affected the minor leagues. This is a really fun video. I don't dig into college stuff too much, but it was really fun to explore this idea and consider something very forward-looking. Not necessarily my strength, but I hope I did the topic justice and reflected what a lot of people in baseball have told me about the present state of the sport on the amateur side specifically, and how perhaps those two can be tied together better, more effective in a way. Maybe there's some way the NCAA and MLB actually work perfectly together. And we're talking about this in 6 to 7 years as college baseball is this unbelievable powerhouse that really does a great job of growing the game alongside the MLB, really loving the development circuit. There's also a potential negative outcome. There's a lot of different situations that I think could occur, and I appreciate you thinking them through with me on this video as always. Happy New Year. Thanks for checking out my channel. We hit 20K recently, which I'm really hyped about. I don't know what my goal is for 2026 here. I think I have the outside goal of probably like 35,000, some like acceleration of the rate of growth here. So If you could help me out, share my channel, show it to your friends who like baseball, I would appreciate it a ton. Take care.